practice as an advocate of high courts in Pakistan. And after his LLM from Harvard, he started his law practice in the state of New York. That was followed by his role of solicitors of England and Wales in 2004. In 2005, he started his journey of unmatched contribution to Pakistan in various capacities. Member of the Board of Governors of the Nazariya-e-Pakistan Trust, member of the Board of Trustees of the Pakistan Movement Workers Trust, and as a model public leader, including as a member of the Senate of Pakistan. Senator Waleed Iqbal belongs to a family of international renown in the fields of intellect, law, public welfare, judicial service, and social activism. He regularly appears in international conferences, public talks, debates, and television talk shows. He has several published papers to his credit on a variety of legal and non-legal topics, including Pakistan's nuclear tests, Pakistan's constitutional system, alternate dispute resolution, Pakistan-Russia relations, and the life and teachings of Allama Muhammad Iqbal. He is currently serving as the chairman of the Senate Standing Committee on Human Rights and is also a member of the Senate Standing Committee of Defense, Foreign Affairs, Law and Justice, and Parliamentary Affairs. Thank you so much, Honorable Senator Waleed Iqbal, for joining us today. Now over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you to Comstech, and thank you to all other hosts who have been involved in arranging this webinar. I'm very happy to be here and to be addressing you on this relatively unexplored subject involving the life and teachings of Allama Muhammad Iqbal, which involves his perspective on science and technology. My conversation with you will be in two parts. In the first part, the first part or the first half, I'm not sure if it'll be half and half. I'm keeping an eye on the clock because I'm meant to be speaking until local time 3:45 p.m. and then be taking 15 minutes of questions if there are any. So the two parts, in the first, I'll be talking about, it'll be more anecdotal about incidents involving Allama's own life and little bits and pieces of his works. And in fact, by way of background, I right at the outset, I had mentioned that this is a relatively unexplored subject. I myself, for at least the last maybe 15 years, have been talking about Dr. Iqbal's life and teachings in Pakistan and outside Pakistan. And only in November of 2021, at the occasion of his last birth anniversary, on the 9th of November, did I first delve into this topic. Because I was asked by a university in Islamabad, the Bahria University, was organizing an international conference, and the opening session, the inaugural session, which was chaired by the President of Pakistan, Dr. Arif Alvi, I had wanted to, they had given me a bunch of topics, and I was wanting to speak about Iqbal's concept of leadership. But they said, no, there were 5 topics in total. They said, no, we are going to give you Iqbal and science and technology. So I gave a talk over there, which was just about 10, 15 minutes long. And that was just a little bit earlier in a journal. An article on the same subject had been published by a scholar by the name of Abu Junaid Inayat Ali. So my conversation revolved around that. But today, apart from that, which was anecdotal and relating to his works, in the second part, I have also supplemented that earlier talk, which is found on YouTube. Bahria University has put it on YouTube. And that is in Urdu, of course. So I'll supplement that with another writing on the subject by a Malaysian scholar by the name of Muhammad Abbas Abdul Razak. So without further ado, let me start by telling you all that Allama Iqbal is generally considered as an intellectual, a poet, and a philosopher. And at most, his admirers take him as a great leader of the Muslims of the subcontinent, a strong supporter of pan-Islamism and a national reform. But as a matter of fact, few have an idea that Iqbal was fully aware of all the contemporary disciplines and had a deep understanding of the scientific developments and philosophical debates of the 20th century. Despite the fact that he had never been admitted to a university to study science, Iqbal was well versed with the science of anatomy as well as the latest inventions in the fields of engineering and technology. Researchers have found that books on science and engineering by some of the most prominent scholars of his time remained under Iqbal's study. And therefore, Iqbal's poetry and philosophical thoughts are not only a combination of the impact of modern scientific developments, but also contain impressive predictions on the basis of his study of modern science. So I guess one can say with a fair degree of certainty that Iqbal was the only poet of Urdu and Persian languages who was possessed with sound knowledge of science and technology. One of his young devotees during his lifetime, and one of his biographers also, Fakir Sayyid Wahiduddin, has described an incident in his book on Iqbal's life called Roozgar-e-Fakir. In 1925, three young men, Niaz Muhammad Khan, Mumtaz Hassan, and Mian Nasir Ahmad, who later became the chairman of Public Service Commission, they visited Allama Iqbal in his residence at McLeod Road, Lahore. Iqbal asked them about the disciplines they were studying. He asked these young men, and Mian Nasir Ahmad told Iqbal that they were students of physics and chemistry. Iqbal started talking about the theory of relativity and pointed out that he had gone through the concepts of mathematics to understand this theory. And Iqbal added that the theory of relativity was all about the reality that this world was not everlasting. Rather, he thought from that theory that it was finite, i.e., born on a date specific and was to die on a date specific. During that discussion, one of the young men, Mian Nasir Ahmad, informed Iqbal that an American physicist, Professor Compton, was to deliver a lecture at the Physics Theatre of Government College, Lahore, where Iqbal himself had studied as a young man before going to Europe, to England and to Germany. So on the appointed day, Iqbal was found sitting calmly in the last row of the physics theater of the government college. And the American professor, after giving his talk, invited the audience for questions. And Iqbal raised quite a few critical questions, questions that were full of knowledge and complexity, to the extent that majority of those present could not even properly comprehend them. And even Professor Compton, after a certain point, expressed his inability by saying that the science, knowledge of science, study of science, scientific research could not, because the questions were perhaps bordering on the spiritual, he said science could not answer such questions in absolute terms. In his poetry and in his lectures, particularly the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam, Iqbal had benefited from the modern scientific theories. His interest in science was also reflected in the fact that he was of the firm belief that Muslim students should get involved in scientific education in order to face, in order to compete, in order to face the modern day challenges, and in order to compete with that world of that time, in that world of that time. So in addition to that, he also advocated more and more translations of scientific books into Urdu for the benefit of Muslim students, in terms of their, enhancing their, or, giving them an opportunity to understand scientific concepts. Once upon a time, in 1932, Iqbal spoke to the father of Urdu, Baba-e Urdu in New Delhi, Maulvi Abdul Haq, telling Baba-e Urdu that his efforts for the promotion of the Urdu language were commendable, but that his focus was exclusively towards literature. So Iqbal advised Baba-e Urdu, Maulvi Abdul Haq, that he should instead understand the need of the hour and translate books of science into Urdu to help young Muslims extricate, and these are the kinds of words Iqbal used, to help young Muslims extricate themselves from a world of fantasy and to step into or emerge into the field of real knowledge. Thus, when Maulvi Abdul Haq asked Iqbal to suggest a book to translate, Iqbal pointed to George Sarton's book, Introduction to the History of Science, because Iqbal felt that not only did it encompass the history of science as a subject, but also described the role of Muslims in its development. This book was published in 1927 in Baltimore, USA, in 3 volumes. And researchers on Iqbal's life indicate that it was one of the 21 books on science that were under Iqbal's study at that time. Another young devotee of Iqbal, who also subsequently became a renowned biographer of Iqbal, Sayyid Nazir Niazi, has written that Iqbal was of the view that Muslims had failed to understand that it was the religion of Islam which had furnished to the world the basic prerequisites of scientific study. And what were those basic prerequisites? As Iqbal describes them: observation, inspection, deep thinking, experimentation, research, interrogation, affirmation of facts, their study and interpretation, and thereupon the growth of knowledge. Iqbal actually felt that the passage to knowledge could have been stalled for ages in the absence of these very fundamental prerequisites, which, according to him, had been furnished to the world by the religion of Islam. Allama Iqbal's second poetic work, Ramooz-e-Bekhudi, which was published in 1918 and written in 1917-1918, that was the era in which electricity generation had just started, and I think it was through hydel means. But there was no concept of solar energy or wind energy. In fact, the first solar cell was invented in 1954, and then there was a lot of research and engineering, and a small power plant, a prototype, was set up in Italy's city of Genoa in 1968. However, Iqbal writes in Ramooz-e-Bekhudi, his second work, 1917-1918, about 40 or 50 years earlier, in Persian. And for those who know Persian over here in this audience, I apologize in advance if my pronunciation is falling short of perfect or is not up to par. He wrote, Tabish az Khurshid Alam Tabgir, Barke Tak Afroz az Silab Gir, which translates in English to, you should seek brightness from the solar system and generate electricity through water to lighten up your dwellings. Similarly, wind energy, a commercial operation for generation by wind energy, was first carried out in 1980 in the state of New Hampshire in USA. But once again, back in 1917-1918, Allama had written in Persian, Khish ra bar pushte bada swar kun, yani in jamazara mahar kun, which translates into English as embark on the back of air and harness this beast to your advantage. The process of mining had also started more or less at the time of Allama Iqbal, but he urged the Muslims, Dast rangeen kun zekhune kohsar, jueab goharaz darya barar, which translates into English as decorate your hands with the blood oozing out of mountains and dig out a stream of splendid pearls out of the sea. In other words, he stressed on search for the treasures of nature out of mountains and rivers. Now, all the poetic works, all the writings of Iqbal are unique in their nature. But from among them, one of the last, or among the last, Javednama, the pilgrimage to eternity, is of extraordinary importance. In Javednama, Iqbal has described his, in Urdu you would say, the condition is vijdani, kafiyat is vijdani, or in English it would be an ecstatic state of mind. He has described his journey through the cosmos along with his spiritual mentor, Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. And just imagine the intuitive height of Iqbal's mind, that he started his journey from land, from the earth, like Rumi invites him. Rumi emerges from the clouds and invites Iqbal to leave his body and come to on a trip through the cosmos. And the intuitive height of Iqbal's mind is that he starts his journey from the earth like a seasoned astronomer and mentions all the places he visits, the planets, in their logical order. Starting from the nearest moon, situated at a distance of 384,500 kilometers, followed by Mercury at a distance of 105.9 kilometers. Then Venus at a distance of 133.1 million kilometers. Then Mars at a distance of 395.62 million kilometers. Saturn at a distance of 1.4 billion kilometers. This is the order. Like a seasoned astronomer, Allama Iqbal, that's how he posits all the planets in his journey. And finally, he enters the heavens. So to say that his whole journey was in line with the position of these planets around the orbit. And on Mars, for example, in the end, he meets various Muslim and non-Muslim personalities. But on Mars, he meets a woman who prophesizes. He meets a woman who prophesizes and gives him a message for the women on earth. Now, the Persian there was a bit complicated, so I skipped that part in Persian, and I will only give you the message as translated into English. As I said, I found that Persian to be a bit unpronounceable. The message that the woman on Mars gives to Iqbal to give to the women on earth is, and I quote in translation, "Now the time has come that genes would be seen through the body of women because of the miracle of science. The time has come that you would be able to get desired production out of your body, parenthetically sons and daughters as per your desire. Child in the womb of mother would grow in a different way, where dawn would appear without dusk," just like mentioning test tube babies. So the far-sightedness of Iqbal was capable of conceiving medical tools like ultrasound and test tube babies in 1930, 1931, which is when Javednama was written, despite the fact that the first ultrasound took place in 1956 and the birth of the first test tube baby was made possible in 1978. So when I presented the abstract to this talk a couple of weeks ago, I had mentioned, and I mentioned in the opening, that there are impressive predictions that Iqbal has made in his poetry, starting from wind energy and solar energy and harnessing wind to your advantage and lighting up your dwellings. And also he talks about mining and getting out of rivers and the mountains, all the great resources that are in there. And then finally talks about talks about ultrasound and test tube babies. And Iqbal also examined, as was stated right in the beginning, that he examined Einstein's theory of relativity in a scientific and philosophical way. He was fully aware of the importance of that theory, as well as its various aspects. In fact, leading Pakistani physicist, Dr. Muhammad Salim, has written about Iqbal's interest in the theory of relativity by stating that renowned physicists were unable to realize the importance of this theory at that age. But such a marvelous grip on the concept of this theory by a philosophical poet without grasping the subject of mathematics is a unique quality of Iqbal. In his epic Urdu poem, Tulu-e-Islam, the dawn or the rise of Islam, he even talks about the splitting of the atom. And I quote in Urdu, and then I will translate in English. Hakikat ek hai, har shay ki, khaki ho ke noori ho, lahu khurshid ka tapke, agar zarre ka dil cheere. Translated in English, there is one reality for everything, be it of earth or fire, that the blood of the sun will drip if we split the heart of an atom. So this concludes, and I'm mindful, and it is the first half, time-wise also. The first half, which I had said would be a bit anecdotal and also would touch upon his related works as far as his predictions or his understanding or his sayings about or his verses about science and technology are concerned. Now I will turn to the other half, which has a somewhat historical and philosophical touch. And that sort of, all of this which I have already presented to you, lurking in the background, and obviously something that Iqbal obsessed over all his life, perhaps from the age that he started in a madrasa at the from the time he started at the age of 4, he started in a madrasa in Sialkot, learning the Quran. And as I said, that something maybe a little later as he became a young man, from that time onwards until his last breath at the age of approximately 61 years of age, something he obsessed over was the past glory of the Muslims and the sort of attitude that they had towards science and learning. And not only that, but what happened to them after, the decline of Islamic civilization, which started with the fall of Baghdad in 1258. Because during the golden age of Islam, from 750 to 1258, Muslims were in the forefront in conquering knowledge through scientific research, exploration, and expeditions. In that process, they borrowed ideas from the Indians, from the Persians and Greeks as a way of enriching their own civilization. Adopt, adapt, assimilate, or integrate was the approach used by early Muslim scholars in taking knowledge from those outside the Islamic faith. And besides learning from earlier civilizations, Muslim scholars went on further to expand and come up with some original and innovative ideas of their own. This was the spirit and culture of learning that was prevalent during the early Muslim era of knowledge, expansion, and exploration. Europeans, as a matter of fact, learned from many pioneering works done by Muslim scholars and scientists in the fields of medicine, astronomy, chemistry, mathematics, algebra, trigonometry, alchemy, geography, sociology, and so on. But during that golden age, much of the scholastic works that were accomplished were either diminished or came to a standstill after the Mongol invasion of Baghdad in 1258. Not only were a great number of Muslims butchered, but also their libraries with large volumes of books and original manuscripts were burnt to ashes. And then the era, and I'm mentioning all of this because this is what Iqbal actually obsessed over all his life. And that was what was lurking in the background. When, in the first part, I mentioned to you all of those, anecdotes from his life and the works that he had on the subject. That the era between the fall of Baghdad and the European colonization of the Muslims, actually, that was in the 18th and 19th centuries, in the colonialization of Muslim lands. That kept the Muslim scholars occupied in their own polemics in the area of Islamic jurisprudence. And in addition to this, they were also bickering and discrediting one another all the time. So as a poet, as a philosopher, as a humanist, Iqbal was interested in a wide spectrum of issues that were very important, not only for the survival of the Muslims. Of course, that was his priority, but being a humanist, they were important for the survival of the Islamic race as a whole. His biographer, Mustansir Mir, and I think perhaps to my own mind, the best biography of Iqbal in English is penned by Mustansir Mir. It's only 200 or something pages. He writes, and I quote, Iqbal was deeply interested in the issues that have exercised the best minds of the human race. The issues of the meaning of life, change and constancy, freedom and determinism, survival and progress, the relation between the body and the soul, the conflict between reason and emotion, evil and suffering, the position and role of human beings in the universe. And in his poetry, he deals with these and other issues. He fashioned himself or thought of himself as a Muslim scholar who aspired to see change and progress within the Muslim society of his time. One of his works, perhaps the first work, Asrar-e-Khudi, this is like an autobiographical sort of set of verses translated from Persian into English by Sayyidain, one of the scholars of Iqbal, who wrote on Iqbal and education, and co-wrote a couple of articles during Iqbal's lifetime with Iqbal. So here's Iqbal addressing his own self, or talking of his own self in his Persian poetry. He says, what can I do? My nature is averse to rest. My heart is impatient like the breeze in the poppy field. When the eye beholds an object of beauty, the heart yearns for something more beautiful still. From the spark to the star, from the star to the sun is my quest. I have no desire for a goal. For me, rest spells death. With an impatient eye and a hopeful heart, I seek for the end of that which is endless. In Urdu, for those who speak and understand Urdu, what he's saying and what his philosophy was, that harkat mein barkat hai or sukoon mein maut. This is the essence of what this Persian work translated into English spells out. And it is also expressed in his concept of love, which I recently, a couple of months ago, or 3 or 4 months ago, talked about at the National Defense University in Islamabad. The concept of ishq is also reflected here in this very set of verses. In conventional Urdu poetry, and classical Urdu poets, have talked about the ishq of union, or what you call in Urdu or Farsi as the ishq of visal, where the lover and the beloved, there is a yearning, and the lover eventually attains and has a union with the beloved. And there is found some sort of rest, some sort of fana is attained, peace is attained, peace, rest is attained. And that is the ishq of wisal or the ishq of union. These verses reflect the opposite, because the concept of ishq in Iqbal's poetry is the opposite of that. It is not the ishq of union. It is the ishq. It is not the ishq of wisal or union. It is the ishq of firaq, or the ishq of separation. Because in that ishq, there is a constant yearning. There is in Urdu what you call bechani. There is bekarari. There is this mercurial nature that he feels that if it were to be departed from him, his life would come to an end. One of his biographers, Mirza Munawwar, writes, Iqbal had keenly studied philosophy of both the East and the West. He was well versed in literature, history, and law. A student of science he perhaps never was, yet he kept a keen eye on the latest scientific discoveries and theories. Being thus equipped intellectually, he was in a position to pick up good points from different systems of polity, philosophy, economics, and whatnot, and weave them into a new pattern. In his poetry, Iqbal called the Ummah to utilize science for the betterment of their lives by using it to extract the bounties that God has provided for them in the material world. In his opinion, man must use science and technology to bring out the hidden potential from the belly of the earth to be utilized for his spiritual development. Asrar-e-Khudi, Iqbal's first published work, 1915, translated into English, one of the verses, science is an instrument for the preservation of life, he writes. Science is a means of invigorating the self. Khudi, Asrar-e-Khudi, secrets of the self. I repeat, science is an instrument for the preservation of life. Science is a means of invigorating the self. Science and art are servants of life. Iqbal, in further calling the Muslims to embrace a positive attitude towards the learning and usage of science and scientific research methods, highlighted the point that the message brought by the Prophet is very much in harmony with the scientific revolution that was taking place during the early 20th century. Iqbal, in defending science, also stated his view that on the whole, the message of the Quran is anti-classical. By stating this, he felt the message of the Quran is a call for a dynamic life which utilizes scientific research and exploration. I quote from his renowned lectures on the reconstruction, dense but insightful lectures on the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam. I quote, "The Prophet of Islam seems to stand between the ancient and the modern world. Insofar as the source of his revelation is concerned, he belongs to the ancient world. Insofar as the spirit of his revelation is concerned, he belongs to the modern world. In him, life discovers other sources of knowledge suitable to its new direction. The birth of Islam, as I hope to be able presently to prove to your satisfaction, is the birth of inductive intellect. In Islam, prophecy reaches its perfection in discovering the need of its abolition." Unquote. In realizing the predicaments of the Muslims, Iqbal wanted to bring an Islamic renaissance by directing his philosophy and poetry aimed at awakening the Ummah from its deep slumber towards realizing the demands of the modern world. As a result of his visits to Europe, his message to the Muslims was aimed at calling them to renounce backwardness and to have a positive attitude towards scientific learning and exploration in broadening the horizon of their thinking. Iqbal became an advocate for scientific research in the Muslim world of his time. In many ways, his call towards mastering science and technology, in his call echoed the call made earlier by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, who lived from 1871 to 1898, and also was the founder of the Aligarh University of India. It was his intention to revive the Ummah, Iqbal's intention, to revive the Ummah of its religiosity towards Islam and to restore its dignity and glory, which were once enjoyed by it during the golden days of Islam. During his postgraduate studies in Europe, 1905 to 1908, it is worthy of mention that in 3 years, 1905 to 1908, Iqbal earned his Master of Philosophy from Cambridge, Trinity College. He earned his PhD from Ludwig Maximilian University at Munich, and he earned his Bar at Law from Lincoln's Inn, London. In 3 years, 3 qualifications from 3 of the most renowned centers of higher learning is unparalleled in his age. None of his contemporaries from the subcontinent, such as Gandhi or Nehru or Tagore or Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, assimilated so much knowledge and earned so much so many academic accolades in such little time as Iqbal had. So during his postgraduate studies in Europe from 1905 to 1908, and later through his travel in European cities, he felt fascinated by the scientific research that was being conducted there. His fascination for scientific research is a further advancement to what he read in the Quran. As a religious book, the Quran contains many scientific data and calls for the observation and contemplation on the wonders found in the creations of God in the universe, flora and fauna. To Iqbal, the exploration, observation, and investigation done by the scientists is a kind of mystic behavior, trying to establish an intimacy with the Creator. Iqbal's attitude towards science is the likeness shown by scholars such as Ibn Sina, Al-Khwarizmi, Al-Biruni, and others of the medieval era. In modern times, Iqbal's emphasis on scientific research is the echoing, in addition to what Sir Syed Ahmad Khan had taught. It was an echoing of what had been said by Jamaluddin Afghani and Muhammad Abduh. Iqbal was a religious reformer, and all his works in poetry and philosophy were aimed at bringing the Muslims out of their backwardness, superstitious beliefs, conservatism, and passivity in life towards a state of preparedness in facing the challenges of the modern world. In Iqbal's view, the message of the Quran, is not all rituals or zikr, but also scientific fikr. As Muslims, we should possess both these two aspects mentioned in the Quran in order to fulfill our duties in this world as Allah's vicegerents. In line with Iqbal's vision for the survival of the Ummah, modern day Muslims should be prepared to learn from others, particularly from the West, the latest development in the areas of science and technology for the betterment of the Ummah and humanity at large. In conclusion, I must state that in the same spirit as Iqbal as is contained in the life and works of Allama Iqbal, that on the basis of availing modern methodology, modern science and methods of research and science and technology, Muslims would be able to bring back the past glory and the fame once enjoyed by them. The Islamic Ummah, which was once the leader of other societies in the world, is at present being led by others due to its failure in understanding the true message of the Quran, which, according to Iqbal, is zikr as well as fikr. Thank you very much. I think I finished just in the nick of time.
Yes, thank you very much, sir, for this very interesting and insightful talk. We have a few questions in the chat box. May I take them, sir?
Yes, I'm listening.
Okay. So, sir, somebody wants to ask that what the reason could have been that Iqbal's thought and messages were neglected so broadly from our indigenous and formal education system and curriculums?
I guess this is about Pakistan particularly.
Yes, sir.
I believe it has to do with the fact that, unfortunately, we are one of the least educated countries in the world, as is expressed or is evidenced by the rate of literacy in our country, one of the least educated. And also, my own view of this is to do with the kind of leadership or the kind of priorities that the leadership in Pakistan has sort of had on their radar screen, and coupled with the fact that we have had in the 75 years of our history authoritarianism, finding its way to half the time, authoritarian system ruled. And once again, when the priorities are, to gain legitimacy, to gain recognition, then, to promote education and to promote enlightenment and to promote modernism may superficially be there, but they go onto the back burner. So the priorities and the geopolitical, we can't lay our woes on the doorstep of others, but somehow, how we as a nation have been dictated to by the, outsiders or powers that have had a policy of enslaving the people of South Asia, one way or the other, may it be the Cold War rivals or the unipolar world right now. Somehow, having an educated country and having Iqbal's philosophy gain prominence in the learning process from beginning to end has not been that kind, has not enjoyed the kind of priority. I think I would just add very, very quickly, in contrast to that, because in certain neighboring parts of our country where democracy has taken root, it has been, in India, for example, in independent India, right after independence, a few years later, in fact, a commission had been formed to set up libraries across the nation, across the country. And if you contrast the number of libraries and the number of books that are available to the public in neighboring country, and how in Japan and Germany and the United States, Library of Congress, and when you start counting the number of libraries in Pakistan and the number of books that are available there, it would not even rise to a percentage that is in double figures. So knowledge and the promotion of knowledge has not been a priority. When we change the priority, I think we can get the better results also.
Thank you so much, sir. There's another question. My question of interest is, beside having all the, based upon Iqbal's teaching, what advice would you give the man of today, specifically when it comes to khudi, how to find your khudi in this era when all of us are scattered, anxious, and stressed about other worldly things?
Iqbal's philosophy of khudi is his philosophy of self, which would translate into self-belief, self-esteem, self-realization, self-reliance. So khudi, there are on the individual and the collective levels. His philosophy of khudi has, I would say, four, and this is how my late father, Dr. Javed Iqbal, has explained Allama Iqbal's philosophy of khudi, is built on four tenets or four pillars. So if those four tenets or those four moral values are adopted at the individual and at the collective levels, adopted and practiced, obviously they would serve to, ameliorate or enhance the stature at individual and both collective levels. What are those four tenets? Number one is ishq or passion, and I already explained that earlier. The ishq as posited by Iqbal, the concept of ishq, the ishq of separation, the mercurial nature where you come to rest only when you're in your final resting place. Otherwise, life is a constant quest. And, Iqbal talks about the supremacy of man over universe. That is what man can attain. Man or a human can attain, if you want to be gender neutral. So the ishq or passion of separation, that's the first moral value. The second is courage or jurat. Ishq, jurat, courage, which is not that kind of courage which is involved in simply in, fighting battles or wars or taking up fights, but courage to be able to stand up for your principles and to speak the truth. That kind of courage, jurat. The third tenet is faqru istaghna, which is non-materialism. This is how the symbol that he uses in his poetry, the Shaheen. There is a verse, कि परिंदों की दुनिया का दरवेश हूं मैं, कि शाही बनाता नहीं आशियाना. The Shaheen doesn't build a dwelling because he's a dervish of the world of all the birds. So that is non-materialism, or to be disconnected, or in Urdu, la ta'alluq, from material attractions. Faqru istaghna. And in Payam-e-Mashriq, there is a very beautiful small Persian poem, which Faiz Ahmed Faiz has translated equally beautifully in Urdu, where the concept of faqru istaghna, or dervishi, non-materialism, is expressed by Iqbal through a Kashmiri poet. His name is Ghani Kashmiri. A small poem on Ghani Kashmiri mentions his lifestyle, that, Ghani Kashmiri, whenever he used to be inside his home, he would lock it up. And when he would leave his home, he would leave everything open. And one day somebody asked him, this is how the poem goes. One day somebody asked him, Ghani Kashmiri, what is the logic behind this? When you are inside your home, you lock it up. And when you leave everything open. What are you trying to tell us? Or what is the principle, or what's the issue? So Ghani Kashmiri said, the most valuable thing inside my home is me, myself. And when I'm not there, I don't care of anything else or about anything else. So that's the third quality. And the fourth tenet is azadi, is the freedom. Freedom is not just political or economic freedom, but is the freedom from taqleed, freedom from copycatting, freedom to go in and have the courage and the ishq and the non-materialism, the freedom to go and create something new, to be creative, which is, I think, all of the preceding or the entire talk was about. And creativity is such an important element in Iqbal's poetry. And of course, we talked about the planets and how they are positioned and how Iqbal goes through those planets. But when he's at the end in the heavens, and in the last chapter of Javed Nama, and these verses show what emphasis he gives, he lays upon creativity. In the last chapter of Javed Nama, which is called Khatab Bajaved, addressing Javed, translated. And the parenthetical subtitle is a conversation with the next generation. He makes God say this. He makes God say this, this is God saying in his Iqbal's verse, that whosoever, that human who has not been creative in this world is somebody who has not been creative, is one who has not taken his share out of my beauty. God is saying this. He has not taken his share from my beauty. And he is an infidel or a munafiq. हर के उरा कुव्वत तख्लीक नीस्त पीछे माँ जुज काफिरो जिंदीक नीस्त कि जिसने तख्लीक नहीं की उसने हमारे जमाल में से अपना नसीब हासिल नहीं किया. He has not taken our share or his fortune out of God's beauty. And he is somebody who is deprived of the fruit of life. Zindagani ke phal se mehroom hai. So that freedom to be creative. So sorry, it was a long answer, but I had to explain those 4 tenets or social values of the philosophy of Buddhi.
Right, sir. Thank you so much. And since we're short on time, we can take one more question. So this person is asking, despite having all the resources, rules, and regulations, why Pakistan is lagging behind in scientific research even after 75 years of independence? Why our nation and political leaders are unable to live up to the edge of the scientific innovations? What perspective should be followed in the light of Allama Iqbal's teaching to deal with this scenario?
I think we can take one more question after this, because I have already answered this in the answer to the first question about promotion of knowledge not being a priority or a political priority. That is and what it has caused is, a great brain drain, because, part of the answer is there. Part of the answer is in the last question I answered, particularly the last part about being creative and about, researching, and that being creative is obviously includes creativity in the field of science and technology. But there is this great brain drain because we are better than what we were before, but we still lack those centers of higher learning. And I'll tell you from my first year in college, when I was in the mid 1980s, after doing my A-levels and I went to the United States, one of the greatest centers of higher learning in the field of science and technology, MIT. Now imagine there are three leading departments of study: electrical engineering, chemical engineering, and material science. In those three, I went to visit my classmates who were there. I was in Philadelphia and University of Pennsylvania. But when I went to MIT in the mid 1980s, the Student of the Year awards for these 3 subjects. Now, these are, and the people from all over the world, including the Far East and Europe and Australia and North America, were there. The top 3 positions, the top positions in 3 fields of study, electrical engineering, chemical engineering, and material science, were occupied by Pakistanis. 2 were from HSN College, Lahore, my classmates, and 1 was from Karachi Grammar School, Karachi. So it's not as if there is any problem with the human composition over here. It's just the environment and the enabling system that we lack, and we unfortunately have lacked. So we can take one more question, can we not?
Yes, sir. There's another question. He's asking this in Urdu. इकबाल का तस्वुरे इश्क रिवायत से मुख्तलिफ होने की क्या वजह है?
Is this supposed to be answered in Urdu also?
So we have international participants, so I think it's better if we keep
okay, the question is, why is Iqbal's the concept of love or ishq different from the traditional concept?
Yes, sir.
It is due to his nature and the experience that he went through, which was a combination of East and West. The 2 sources of inspiration, the greatest sources of inspiration, 2 greatest sources of inspiration for him were the Quran and its teachings that he started from the age of 4 in the madrasa in Sialkot, and the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. The 2 greatest inspirations. And then I think the fact that in his own life, he had the good fortune of having been blessed by the greatest of instructors and teachers, 2 in particular, and parents who were amenable to him. The irony of it is that when he was at that madrasa, and his teacher, who used to teach Arabic in the mission school in Sialkot, Maulana Mir Hassan, he spotted the talent of this young child, and he went to the half-educated parents of this child in Sialkot and told them, please send him to the mission school, because this talent will go to waste. This boy, this child, when he will grow up, all he will do, He will be performing nikahs and he will be offering funeral prayers if he continues just with this teaching. Please give him modern education so it opens up his mind. So he went to the mission school. And then the same teacher, because in Sialkot in those days, this is the 1880s and 1890s, there was no center of teaching beyond the high school or 12th grade. So he again came and said, Sialkot has nothing more to offer. So send him to Lahore. So he comes to Government College, Lahore. And then he finds Professor Arnold over there, who persuades him to go to Europe. And he goes to Europe between 1905 to 19. So the experience. And he never forgot the incalculable debt that he felt he owed to his first mentor, that Maulana Mir Hassan. Because in 1923, when he was called to the governor's house in Lahore, and the British governor said that, I want to recommend your name for knighthood, and the monarch would confer the knighthood on you. Would you consent? So he said, I will consent only on one condition, that you honor my teacher first, Maulana Mir Hassan. And the governor said, Maulana Mir Hassan, he had not heard of him. What is his most famous work? And Dr. Iqbal said, Mr. Governor, I am his most famous work. So his teacher was first honored with the Shamsul Ulama, honorific, and then Iqbal accepted the knighthood. Similarly, for Professor Arnold, he dedicated the PhD thesis to Professor Arnold and wrote an elegy at his demise also. So the short answer is that it was the environment and the teachings and the experience, which was both spiritual and modern, that enabled him. And eventually, the punchline in this talk is that because of this, he's the only poet of Urdu and Persian languages who actually possessed a solid and sound grasp of science and technology.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I think that's all the questions. And there are a lot of praises for your very informative talk. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much to all the participants who joined us from all around the world. And we hope to see you in another lecture from.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, sir. Allah Hafiz.